The outer gate shudders, half off its hinges, and the ditch below turns black with bodies pressing forward. Under whipping banners, the Ottoman Empire surges toward the breach, around 80,000. Estimates vary, while barely around 10,000. Christian defenders jam the opening. With shields, stones, and sheer refusal, bombards slam again, shaking dust from the wall as if the city itself is coughing. From high above, ladders rise like a moving forest, and the river glints behind smoke. At ground level, boots skid in mud. A splintered beam rolls, and a torch catches on pitch-soaked timber fire racing faster than orders. Behind the Ottoman trenches, a signal flag snaps once. Then the wrong color flashes. A reserve pivots toward the noise instead of the gap, and the pressure shifts to the weakest hinge. But the seam is already tearing. On the riverside, a hidden sally gate cracks open, and a thin line of defenders lunges out, striking the flank that should have been sealed. The Ottoman push hesitates for a heartbeat, then the gate groans. Another ladder bites stone, and the breach widens. So how could the smaller force survive the instant the Ottoman Empire's larger host finally found the weak hinge? Hours before the gate began to fail, the siege already felt inevitable. The Ottoman Empire had taken Constantinople only a few years earlier, and the map seemed to fold inward with every campaign. Belgrade stood on the Danube like a locked door if that fortress opened. The road into the Hungarian heartland opened with it, and every border town would hear the hinge scream. Mehmed II brought a host described as around 80,000, estimates varying with every retelling. And he came with early gunpowder power meant to make stone obey. Across the river and inside the walls, the defenders were closer to around 10,000 soldiers, townsmen, and volunteers, pulled into a single, cramped purpose. John Hunyadi knew the fortress could not win by matching strength. It had to win by refusing to break on schedule. Giovanni da Capistrano's preaching fed the stubbornness, turning fear into motion when the trenches closed and the nights filled with torchlight. The siege lines tightened. The river became a boundary of smoke and sound, and time turned into a weapon. But the Ottoman commanders were already planning something no one could see. Belgrade was not just walls and towers. It was a choke point where rivers forced armies to slow, stack, and expose themselves. The Danube and Sava wrapped the fortress in water and mud, turning every approach into a funnel. For the Ottoman Empire, that funnel promised control ships, trade, troop routes, and a direct path toward Buda and beyond. For the defenders, it meant one brutal advantage. The enemy had to come forward into known angles, again and again. Inside the city, space vanished. Food was counted, arrows were sorted, and every repair crew worked under the rhythm of distant drums. The defenders listened to the bombards, like people listening to weather they could not stop, measuring each impact by how much dust fell from the stone joints. Outside, the Ottoman camp stretched like a temporary city of its own tents in rows, trenches deepening, timber dragged into place, and gunners practicing a slow, patient violence. The imbalance made confidence easy. Around 80,000 against around 10,000 looked like a math problem with one answer. Yet siege math has a trap. A fortress does not need to defeat the whole army. It needs to defeat the timetable. One mistake with a signal, one gap left unwatched, one night raid that burns the wrong pile of supplies, and the larger host starts paying interest on its own size. And the first misread signal was already waiting in the smoke. The siege began with a simple idea: drown the walls in pressure until the defenders forgot how to breathe. Ottoman engineers cut trenches closer, night by night, while gunners tested the stone with heavy shots that turned clean masonry into cracked teeth. On the river, boats probed for weak landings, and chains and stakes tried to tell water where to stop. The Ottoman Empire did not need a heroic moment. It needed repetition, discipline, and the certainty that 10,000 could not answer 80,000 forever. Inside Belgrade, the defenders fought the war that never makes paintings. They hauled rubble, patched breaches with timber, and kept fires controlled, so smoke did not blind their own archers. Hunyadi organized sorties not to win the siege outright, but to steal time, burn a platform, spike a tool, drag back powder, then vanish before the ring closed. Capistrano's followers filled gaps where trained soldiers ran out, turning the parapets into a living seam of hands and voices. Fear still lived there, but it had no private place to hide. Then came the Ottoman plan for the clean break. Coordinated bombardment, ladders in waves, and reserves time to flow through the first true crack. It was meant to end the siege in one violent afternoon, but the fortress had one move the Ottoman commanders had not priced in. Before dawn, the Ottoman Empire reshapes the ground. Trenches bite closer. Wicker screens creep forward, and bombards are dragged onto firmer pads, so recoil stops chewing the earth. Estimates vary, but around 80,000 bodies and animals mean the camp never truly sleeps. Metal clinks, carts groan, and river boats bump softly against stakes. On the walls, a force closer to 10,000 counts ladder lengths and watches the rivers for shadows. Damp air beating on helmets and bowstrings. A wide shot shows siege lines tightening in a gray ring. A ground-level cut shows hands passing stones to the parapet, bucket to bucket, because every spark matters. Then the bombardment tightens 3 heavy impacts in quick rhythm, followed by a silence so sharp it feels like a trap. That silence is the cue. Ladders surge, shields rise, and the first wave runs straight into the kill angles as stones drop and arrows hiss. But a second movement stays low behind wicker screens, edging toward the gate hinge, and the timing feels off. The outer gate begins to quiver as fresh ladders scrape up the stone. The first assault hits like a tide that refuses to retreat. Wide on the walls, defenders lean out and shove ladders back into the ditch. Ground level. Boots slip on wet planks, and a shield edge catches stone with a crack like breaking wood. The Ottoman Empire pushes in layered waves, front ranks absorbing the fall of rocks, rear ranks climbing over them, as if the ditch is simply another step. Then the camera jumps to command level. Flags, drum beats, and runners threading through smoke. A signal goes up to shift pressure from the central wall to the gate side seam, where the masonry has begun to powder under repeated shots. But wind flips the cloth for a breath, and the color reads wrong at distance. A reserve unit pivots toward the louder clash, instead of the weaker hinge. And the defenders notice the change, like animals sensing a gap in a fence. They do not celebrate. They move. A sortie door cracks open, a thin column bursts out, and torches are thrown not at soldiers, but at stacked timber and pitch jars meant for the next ladder wave. Fire blooms low, ugly, and fast, forcing Ottoman ranks to sidestep, compress, and lose spacing exactly where the push needs clean momentum. And in that compression, the gate hinge starts to fail. Smoke turns the breach into a tunnel of shadows. The Ottoman Empire drives men toward the gate side seam, trying to turn pressure into collapse, while defenders jam beams into cracks and fight for inches that feel like miles. From a wide angle, the walline looks steady. From ground level, it looks like a mouth being forced open. A bombardment shot lands too low and sprays grit across the ditch, stunning climbers on both sides. That single mistake buys the defenders a heartbeat, and Hunyadi's men use it like a blade. Hooks rip ladders sideways, and a sudden countersurge clears a strip of parapet. But the Ottoman ladder waves do not stop. They reset, come again, and the numbers make the rhythm brutal. Around 10,000 cannot be everywhere at once, and the Ottoman host is built for wearing people down. The riverfront becomes the next danger. Ottoman boats edge closer under cover of archers, searching for a landing where the wall meets water and the defenders' angles weaken. Capistrano's volunteers rush to answer, packing the edge with shields and stones. But their movement thins the gate sector. The camera cuts back to the hinge. Timber braces creak. Iron rings bend. And a hidden crack crawls across the frame like lightning in slow motion. One more coordinated push, and the gate will open on its own. The next Ottoman wave arrives with discipline, not noise. Wide shot. Ladders rise in staggered rows, so falling men do not block the climb. Ground level. A drummer keeps tempo through smoke, and feet move on that beat, as if fear has been trained out of them. The Ottoman Empire wants a clean moment, one synchronized shove that turns the hinge crack into a full breach. Inside the walls, the defenders are running on fragments of time. Stones are almost gone from the easy piles. Arrows are pulled from shields and reused. Water is rationed because smoke makes throats fail. Hunyadi's men drag a heavy beam toward the gate and wedge it like a bar across a door in a storm. But the masonry around the hinge is no longer trustworthy. Each impact from the bombards shakes that bar loose by a finger's width. The camera jumps to command level again. Messengers sprint. A flag rises, and this time the signal is clear. Commit reserves to the gate seam and crush the defenders before another sortie can burn the staging platforms. Then a sharp sound cuts through everything, iron giving way. The gate does not swing open yet, but it drops an inch, then another, like a breath being forced out of a chest. Ottoman troops surge to exploit it, too many bodies too fast, while defenders brace for the moment the opening becomes a flood. At the hinge, the final pin starts to slide. The gate gap becomes visible just enough to promise disaster. Ottoman troops press shields into the opening and drive their weight forward, trying to turn inches into a doorway. Defenders answer with the ugliest tools left: stones, spear points, and timber shoved down like a wedge meant to split the push. The Ottoman Empire has the advantage of mass. But mass also stacks bodies into the same narrow throat. And the crush becomes its own enemy. A wide shot reveals the real problem. The assault at the gate is pulling Ottoman attention inward, away from the river edge. In the haze near the water, a thin defender column slips out through a lesser sally point and runs along the bank, low and fast, using smoke as cover. Command level catches it, late shouts, a flag snapping up, a runner trying to redirect units already committed to the gate. But the misread earlier has left the reserve timing ragged, and now every correction arrives one breath behind. Ground level at the river. The defenders hit the nearest siege platform and set it alight, not to kill, but to blind. Firelight throws wild shadows across the Ottoman boats. Oars splash, men shout, and a landing attempt stalls in confusion. That stall steals pressure from the gate for a moment, just a moment, but the hinge is already failing. The camera cuts back to the opening as the timber bar slips and the iron ring bends. The gap widens into a space wide enough for a shield and then for a man. The breach turns into a doorway, and the fight becomes a contest of bodies and timing. Ottoman troops force the first entry under shields, trying to establish a foothold inside the gatehouse. Defenders surge from both sides, not with elegance, but with a single goal: slam the door shut by making the space impossible to hold. The Ottoman Empire has around 80,000 outside, but only a handful can fit through at once. And the gatehouse becomes a cramped battlefield where numbers feel strangely distant. A wide shot shows the Ottoman lines still rolling forward. More ladders, more drums, more movement, while inside, the defenders are spending their last organized strength on one choke point. Hunyadi's veterans drive in a counterpush, and for a breath, the doorway clogs with shields locked edge to edge. Then comes the problem no plan likes. Smoke shifts with the wind, and visibility collapses. Orders turn into guesses. A runner emerges coughing, points the wrong direction, and a defender unit moves to reinforce a sector that is not under threat, leaving the gatehouse thinner than it looks. At command level, Ottoman officers sense the wobble and commit fresh units to the seam, betting everything on the next surge. The drums quicken. The ladders rise again. The doorway widens by another handspan as the hinge gives a final, tired creak, and the defenders realize the gatehouse will not hold through one more wave. The gatehouse is still contested, but the battlefield shifts in a way no siege plan wants. Instead of feeding every fighter into the crack, a defender column spills out from a side postern and slams into the nearest Ottoman trench from the flank. Torchlight flashing through smoke. Wide shot. A clean assault line turns jagged as units wheel to face a threat that was supposed to be trapped behind stone. Command level expects the defenders to stay pinned, yet the smaller force gambles on motion. Hunyadi's veterans aim for tools and powder, ripping down screens and cutting lashings, so ladders collapse into their own lanes. Capistrano's followers surge behind them, and for minutes the Ottoman Empire cannot tell how many have broken out or where the strike will land next. Ground level shows the price of that uncertainty. Runners collide in the haze. A boat line drifts, and the trench near the hinge thins. Now comes the decision that can flip the siege in a single order. Pull reserves to crush the breakout, or keep them at the gate and gamble the wall will fall first. If the reserves turn away from the breach for even 10 minutes, the Ottoman Empire could lose the gate or lose the siege line. Ottoman command commits to the gate, betting that stone and numbers will outlast any breakout. Reserves surge forward, drums pounding a steady threat, and the gate seam is hammered again with coordinated pressure. But the breakout does not fade, it spreads. Wide shot. Smoke thins just enough to reveal defenders striking multiple points along the trench line, turning the siege ring into a series of sudden fires. Ground level in the Ottoman camp feels wrong. Siege platforms meant to be safe behind the lines ignite. Animals bolt, and supply carts jam narrow lanes. The Ottoman Empire's advantage, around 80,000 bodies, becomes friction when space collapses. Orders can't travel cleanly through a camp that's moving the wrong direction. A misread flag reappears in the chaos, and units hesitate, unsure whether the call is to advance, regroup, or protect the guns. At the gatehouse, defenders seize the moment. With the Ottoman push partially stalled by rear chaos, the defenders wedge beams back into the opening and force the throat narrower again. The doorway that was widening now becomes a trap because the Ottoman troops inside are isolated from the mass outside by smoke, heat, and clogged movement. Command level sees it too late. The siege is no longer one clean assault, but a fight against a fortress that has crawled out of its walls. If the gate closes even halfway, the Ottoman Empire's forward wedge will be cut off inside Belgrade. The gate does not fully close, but the push loses its certainty. Ottoman troops at the seam fight to keep the opening alive, while defenders hammer wedges into place and slam debris into the throat. Wide shot. The siege ring still looks massive, but the center is starting to wobble. Fires behind the lines, boats drifting off station, and trenches that no longer feel coordinated. Command level tries to restore order with the fastest tool available: a concentrated strike. Units are redirected to crush the breakout corridors and reopen clear lanes to the gate, but the defenders have turned the battlefield into a maze. Smoke hides small movements, and every safe lane has a sudden ambush of stones, arrows, and torches aimed at supplies, not bodies. That choice is strategic. Burning platforms and scattering powder stalls, assaults more reliably than any single clash at the wall. Ground level shows the turning point tightening. Ottoman troops inside the gatehouse are pressured from both sides, hearing the mass outside, but unable to feel it. Defenders press in, forcing them back toward the opening as if squeezing a wedge out of a crack. The Ottoman Empire still has the larger host, but the fight is now split into isolated pockets that cannot reinforce each other at the speed a siege requires. If the next Ottoman order fails to reconnect the assault lanes, the Ottoman Empire's entire attack will fracture into retreat. The decisive sequence comes in a blur of smoke, firelight, and exhausted timing. Ottoman units attempt one more coordinated surge at the gate seam, but the lanes behind them are clogged, burned platforms, panicked animals, and scattered supplies, turning speed into stutter. Defenders strike that hesitation immediately, pushing outward in a hard countersurge that targets the assault's spine. Ladders kicked loose, screens toppled, and the nearest guns forced to fall silent as crews scrambled to protect powder and tools. Wide shot. The Ottoman siege ring, once tight and confident, ripples as sections pull back to avoid being cut off by fresh sorties. Ground level. The gatehouse becomes a choke point in reverse. with Ottoman troops forced back through the narrow opening under pressure from defenders who refused to let the crack widen again. The Ottoman Empire's advantage in numbers remains real, but it cannot be applied cleanly when the battlefield becomes a set of bottlenecks and burning lanes. The assault loses rhythm, then loses momentum, then loses the logic that made it feel inevitable. By the end of the day, Belgrade stands. The Ottoman attack breaks off, not from a single dramatic collapse, but from a chain of delays that turned mass into liability. In the dust beyond the walls, abandoned ladders lean at odd angles like questions left unanswered. Belgrade's survival hits Europe like a cold shock. The fortress remains a locked door on the Danube, and the road into Hungary does not open on schedule. In the immediate aftermath, the defenders' victory becomes a signal that the Ottoman Empire can be stopped not easily, not permanently, but in a way that forces every court and commander to rethink what inevitable really means. The numbers in the title, around 10,000 against around 80,000, estimates varying, become more than a statistic. They become a story weapon. The lesson is not that smaller forces always win. It is that sieges are fights against time, coordination, and morale, as much as stone. The Ottoman Empire brought weight, early gunpowder, and a campaign logic built on momentum. Yet Belgrade turned momentum into congestion, a misread signal, a breakout at the wrong hour, a fire in the wrong lane. Small disruptions multiplied until the larger host could not apply its strength where it mattered most. Long term, the siege hardens borders and deepens fear on both sides. It delays Ottoman pressure northward and fuels alliances built on the memory of a gate that almost opened. It also reminds Ottoman planners that walls do not fall simply because a map says they should. They fall when the timetable survives contact with human choices. In 1456, the Ottoman Empire arrived, expecting a doorway, and left behind a warning carved into smoke and stone.